With a couple of tiny solar panels and an outdated controller, we knew we weren't getting the electricity we needed away from shore power. But what to do? Hi there, I'm Carolyn Sherlock, and on this episode of the Boat Galley podcast, I'll share how, in our first year of owning Barefoot Gal, we figured out a solar system that would meet all of our needs. Hopefully, our experience will give you a few things to think about when upgrading your own cruising solar system. Now, today's episode of the Boat Galley podcast is sponsored by Mantis Marine, makers of the Mantis Anchor, now available in models with and without a roll bar. Proven to set reliably in the most challenging bottoms, the Mantis Anchor digs in like no other, making anchoring safer and boating more enjoyable. Mantis Marine brings to market practical, durable, and affordable marine products, including their anchoring gear, scuba diving accessories, rechargeable waterproof headlamp for hands-free lighting, and their latest product, a solar charging nav light, particularly good for dinghies. Visit mantismarine.com and see for yourself. Okay, so let's talk about designing a solar system. Okay, I'm going to go back to when we first bought Barefoot Gal 8 years ago now. In our first winter, we started out by doing quite a bit of work to improve the energy situation. We started by replacing the batteries. We changed over to LED and solar lights whenever possible. We added a battery monitor. Since at that time we were using lead acid batteries, we added a battery watering system. Just for reference, we're now using lithiums, but back then that was a big thing of what we did. We had also replaced the 1.5 amp shore charger that was on the boat that wouldn't even keep up with actual usage. We also got a Honda 2000 generator. Initially, we used the Honda for just about all of our charging needs unless we were motoring. But our goal was to upgrade the solar charging so that we'd rarely need the Honda. Solar is extremely cost-effective for a boat, as well as silent and virtually maintenance-free. I'm not going to go into all of that. The panel cost keeps going down and down, and the efficiency of both the panels and charger controllers keeps increasing year by year. If you have older equipment, you can probably get quite a bit more out of just an increase even without necessarily adding wattage. However, the other thing that's happening is that you can get more watts into the same amount of footprint, the same space. So that also gives a good thing. Now, when we bought it, Barefoot Gal had only 106 watts of solar panel, and it also had a 16-year-old, very low-tech charge controller. The changes have been considerable since then. Now, what we did, because we didn't know exactly what was state-of-the-art, we found a local contractor. He's now gone cruising himself, so I'm not going to suggest going to him, but we found somebody who is extremely knowledgeable about systems, knowing the state of the art, to help us figure out what really would be best for us, both in terms of how many watts of panels we could actually put on, what the best brands were, and what the best technology and brands for the charge controllers were. Also, we're doing things on a budget. The nice thing about working with the guy that we did was he was willing to have us do sort of the low-tech parts of the work to keep our costs down. We could do the majority of the work on the mountings. We could do the long wiring runs. We could mount the controller, things like that. And then he'd put the mounting brackets on the panel and make the actual electrical connections. It would take two people to lift the panels into position, so Dave would be the second person on that instead of having to help someone. Now, what our helper, Alex, did was give us 3 options for panels, depending both on how much solar we wanted, how much money we thought we could afford, and he also started giving us some advice on where we could or should. One of the things that we asked about was whether we should add to our existing panels or start fresh. And his advice, which holds true adamantly to today, starting fresh is the way to go because the new technology is so much better than the old. We could reuse that space for so much better then. The one thing that we had to figure out was how much solar we wanted. Well, we knew we wanted as much as possible, but the real big thing was where we had to mount it. And we wanted to put it basically over the dinghy davits. And that was great. But really, while we could put probably 500 watts of solar there, it was a little bit scary with how strong the davits were and whether they could really withstand that if we got, say, 50 knots of wind in a storm, or worse yet, had a hurricane come through. We ended up deciding to go with a 350 watt panel, and we started looking at, what we would actually be using. We knew we had some planned upgrades in the way of a refrigerator, switching from a propane refrigerator to a 12 volt. So we wanted to have as much as we could. That 350 watt panel really has stood up very, very well over the years. The only thing that really caused a problem was when we got a separate standalone freezer. Because of going to the Bahamas and the fact that I am diabetic now, I eat a lot of meat. That's about all I eat. And so we needed a little bit more power. We ended up adding a second panel in a different location. We've got 495 watts with the 350 watt panel and then 145. And we are now using 2 Victron MPPT charge controllers, one for each panel. As I understand it now, you really want one controller per panel because of how it deals with shading issues and so forth. You also like to have typically the same brand so that they will talk to each other or talk by Bluetooth. The Victrons are really, really considered state of the art these days. There are some other good brands, but that's the one that I will recommend. Just so you know, originally when we put our first panel on, the panel cost $690 and the controller was $300. We had about $50 worth of wiring and about $250 worth of stainless fittings, tubing, and some beefing up on our dinghy davits. The materials for the extra mounts on the things were $100, and $200 of our consultant's time was $140. So while initially the panel and the controller looked like just under $1,000, we added almost 50%, bringing it up to $1,500 with all of those other so-called little things. So when you're thinking about your budget, remember that it's not just the panel and the controller. It's going to be all of the wiring. The fittings just really start adding up. And if you get anybody's help, of course, some time. Anyways, hope that helps you in figuring out your own solar installations. You can get quite a bit of information online. However, I really recommend getting a little bit of consulting time with somebody who is an expert, who can really help you figure things out if you are not already pretty experienced in solar panels. There's a lot of sort of moving parts in that whole equation. I hope you found this to be interesting and informative episode of the Boat Galley Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, and please, if you would, submit a review for us on your favorite podcast platform. That really helps other people to find us. Thanks.